What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Swish Insights. Today, we'll be diving into private equity entering the college basketball world. With this year's House vs. NCAA settlement, courts approved a revenue-sharing model that will allow athletic programs to directly pay student-athletes a percentage of generated revenue. As a result of this, some universities are moving parts of their athletic revenue into LLC with the purpose to gain flexibility to pay athletes directly and attract outside investment. An example of this was the University of Kentucky Championship Blue becoming the first university in the U.S. to restructure its department in this manner. This LLC model was analyzed in a Forbes article titled, "Is Private Equity Next for Kentucky and College Sports?" by contributor Jesse Silvertown. In this episode, I had the opportunity to speak with Jesse to further discuss this topic. Jesse is a principal at Hesperus, a New York-based forensic M&A firm that works across private equity and sports. He also previously held a CFO position at a high-growth startup and the sports and media entertainment forensic co-chair at Ernst Young. I've left the link down below for the article for those interested in taking a read. But without further ado, let's get right into this conversation. I hope you all enjoy. Again, thanks for taking the time out to speak with me today, Friday afternoon, talking about college sports. Funding is a big topic in the area ever since the legalization this year from the House settlement. NILs have been a trending topic and, recruiting and all those things. And the result of this, colleges have been looking into, getting other outside funding from private equity firms. So that's why you're here today. Based on your article, which you published, I think last year in 2024 about the University of Kentucky, they launched an LLC called the Championship Blue. And this is kind of like a separate entity from what they have in their college, in their basketball department right now. With this, how do you foresee like the funds being split between the university's program and then managed by the LLC? Because they're going to be getting funding against LLC, and then they're also getting funding to the athletic department. So how do you foresee the University of Kentucky doing this, or I guess just universities as a whole with creating LLC?
Yeah, and thanks for having me, Noah. It's great to be here. The way it would work is the schools would roll their athletic department into an LLC. So it's not, I would think of it less like there's an athletic department over here and an LLC over here, and we've got to pick and choose where the money's going to go.
Yeah.
Athletic departments primarily, and I'm sure you've seen this, make their money from at least the biggest schools, from media rights. We're not talking about Canada, where you and I are from, where this is a completely flipped model. But in the United States, at least, media rights is a big chunk, about 30%. Sponsorships is a big chunk. Tickets are a big chunk. So there's no point of having an LLC, so to speak, without having all those pieces, those components in it. So if you take all those components and that makes up the athletic department, and a lot of it comes from football, like 60%, and then a smaller portion comes from basketball, and you move it into another entity, that's the LLC, then you can take outside money, you can have partnerships, you have a little bit more professional approach to it. It hasn't really started to manifest itself yet with deals. I think it's coming, but that's the idea behind it. So I would think of it less like we have the athletic department over here, and then we have an LLC over here. It's just going to be one thing.
Got it. And I guess from a top school perspective, because in the basketball world, you mentioned football, Kentucky's not really known as a football school, but in the basketball world, you have the Kentucky's. They're trying. In the SEC, they're trying. We have Kentucky, you have Duke, UNC, UConn, Villanova. Those are like, I could keep going on, but the top basketball programs in the country. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Kentucky was like one of the first, I guess, to introduce like, their championship blue model, or, this type of model.
The Champions Blue model, yes.
Yeah, championship blue model.
They are ahead of the curve, yes.
Exactly. So I guess from your perspective, why would you think like a top program like Kentucky would want to do this compared, when I think of private equity with funding, I think of like, smaller programs or, would be more in need of kind of getting funding compared to Kentucky, given that they, they're always landing the top recruits. Funding doesn't really seem like, or just creating this model doesn't seem like, I wouldn't think it'd be in the top of their priorities. So why do you think a top school like Kentucky in the college basketball world went into doing this so early?
Yeah, I mean, so I've seen that sort of bandied about in the public that, the biggest schools maybe wouldn't need this because they already make a ton of money. Well, they also spend a ton of money. They have the cost of keeping the programs going. They have cost of coaches and which is a massive staff, especially on the football program. So, and I happen to think that this world is a keeping up with the Joneses kind of world. So if one does it, others will do it too. So I don't. And I saw someone quoted somewhere about the University of Alabama saying, why would private equity get involved? And I forget where the piece was, but why would private equity get involved? Because it's not like you can buy 10% of the University of Alabama.
Exactly.
And I thought that was very wrong. And I apologize to that person who said it. I'm sure I'll get an email at some point, but it's not, that's the entire point of what Kentucky and other schools are going to potentially do is
Hmm.
you don't want someone to invest 10% in the University of Alabama. You want someone to be able to invest 10% in the University of Alabama's athletic department. So you
Yeah.
take that out and put it into its own separate entity, and then you can crystallize a lot of the stuff. Now, the other part of this is, yes, the biggest schools have the war chest and all that. I get it. They're
Hmm.
also valued very highly. So if you look at valuations, I think Mike Ozanian, who's kind of the guy in this world who values professional sports teams, he's valued a lot of these athletic departments. And there's like a bunch of these athletic departments that are valued close to $1 billion or more.
Yeah.
That's MLS numbers. That's Arizona Coyotes numbers. Like that's a big number. So if you have value that you can somehow surface and you can take that money, and by the way, we haven't even talked about the requirement right now that they're going to have to revenue share, so pay
Yeah.
their players. It's a big amount of money, and that number is a sliding scale. So the
Yeah.
biggest schools have to pay a little bit more to their players, and the smaller schools. That
Yeah.
money's got to come from somewhere, and most people, most institutions or public entities, private entities, corporations, schools aren't in the business of just giving up more of their money. They want to try and bring more in. So this is an easy way to, not an easy way, but it's a way to surface some of the value and take in some cash to fund a lot of these activities. So I would push back on anyone who says that this isn't going to happen at the biggest school.
Yeah. Well, Kentucky, I guess they kind of laid the foundation
They
for
did.
other big schools, other big programs in the country to, to do this. So you're right. Probably in a few years, we'll see it all come to fruition with, schools creating LLCs or a similar model. And I guess based off this, because, schools, like the nature of universities and just like entertainment and, providing like the entertainment of, sports to, students or fans, it's constantly evolving. So my question, I guess, is like, for one team that comes to the top of my head is the Atlanta Braves. They have Battery Atlanta, and one of their biggest revenue models. What they do is they have like a whole entertainment center outside their stadium, and a lot of their revenue comes from there. So I guess with these new LLCs, with universities getting more funding, if they invite more private equity investing into these programs, and they, raise more finance, this could, completely transform the whole landscape of like, the environment of like, let's say a football school, for instance, like if you have the football stadium, and outside that football stadium, you have like entertainment centers. Do you ever fear that, the tradition of like a collegiate program can lose that, and it could transfer to like more professional like sports franchises? Because, from the ground up, like when I think of college, specifically college football, I kind of I feel a more culture based compared to, watching an NFL team. So do you ever fear that traditional collegiate, that college pride could go away and it could kind of just turn into like, yeah, it's just strictly a sports franchise now?
75, that's a conversation to have these
Yeah.
days. Have you seen the amount of money? That's the entire reason behind NIL and the
Hmm.
house settlement and revenue sharing is that, you know, as much as, and I love the pageantry of college sports too. It's one of my favorite
Yeah.
things about being down here. I spent some time in Atlanta, and I worked with a lot of people who were very into SEC football, to the point that
Yeah.
I was on audits and people were leaving, on Friday. People didn't leave for anything. People were working around the clock, but they would leave Friday at lunch to go to, wherever campuses they were going to for the weekend to watch college football. It's a tradition. It's a religion down
Yeah.
there. So yeah, I agree. I just think that at the same time, because it's a religion, because it's such a tradition, people really spend a lot of money and time on it.
Yeah.
And that's just turned it into a business that is akin to professional sports. I said it before, the values of these athletic departments are exceeding
Yeah.
professional sports valuations. So I think we're past, like, the cat is well out of the bag on that.
Yeah. It's a hobby. Like you said, you worked in audit and your coworkers went to weekends, they would go to games. It's an expensive hobby. So, and I think the settlement this year with NIL, like kind of like or 4 years ago when it got legalized, that kind of just like put the icing on the cake. And I guess from an investor's perspective, when, universities start opening these investments from these firms, like what do you expect the returns to be or private equity firms? What do you expect them to like achieve? Do you think they'd want like explosive growth or predictable returns from like year over year? What do you think their thought process is when investing into these programs?
Yeah, I mean, the thought process is predictable returns, because
Mm-hmm.
all the biggest conferences have locked in television deals where exactly, and like I said before, the biggest revenue stream is
Yeah.
media rights. You're
Mm-hmm.
talking 30 or 35% usually.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so because you know the biggest revenue stream is locked in and predictable, very easy to model that out, for instance.
Yeah.
That's appealing to investors. In terms of like what return they would want, private equity firms usually look at like 8-10% maybe, something like that yearly, give or take, I think, if you just sort of do the math. But who knows? I don't think, that part we'll see. It's still really early days in this. So.
Is that 8 to 10% like from the sports angle, or just general speaking?
No, when you raise a fund, yeah. So that's you're hoping to
speaking.
return to your limited partners usually. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, interesting. And I guess I mentioned earlier that the settlement came in, and now as a result, revenue sharing is introduced. I also mentioned again, Kentucky was one of the first programs to introduce this LLC model. Given that this whole funding, paying players, this topic has been just introduced, do you think it's maybe programs are thinking, or do you think it's, or private equity firms, it may be just uncertainty, with everything going on, since everything's just kind of becoming legalized? You think maybe in 5 years we start seeing more it's a constant not day-to-day thing, but it just be a constant thing where you see this university is raising X amount of money from so-and-so, or what do you think of?
I don't think, I mean, obviously private, there was some, I think I wrote about it even when I wrote that piece for Forbes, but there's obviously some people in private equity land that are saying, it's too much uncertainty. And I think there's Connor maybe or something like that. He's like, oh, there's too much uncertainty. The government hasn't figured their stuff out yet, all that. Okay. First of all, the House settlement did pass recently, I think. So
yeah, but
that big issue is out the window, and there's some settlement there, no pun intended. The other part of this to me is the question isn't where private equity, because private equity firms have raised funds that are sports centric for years. They need to deploy that capital. So think about it. If you're a private equity firm and you raised a fund from anybody, from me or whoever else, I've given you money, you promised to go invest it in sports. And there's not that, there's some, but there's not always sports deals available. It's not like healthcare or tech or consumer products where there's sort of this green field or blue sky of deals to potentially invest in. So college sports is this whole new environment almost to put your money into. So there is going to be appetite in my mind, and there's a I don't know how nerdy you want to get, but there's a runway. When you raise a fund as a private equity firm, you have to return, or you actually get the capital in, but you have 10 years usually from start to finish. So you have a couple years maybe of deal sourcing, and then a few years of operation, and then you start thinking about selling. So it's there's a ticking clock there. So I think private equity firms, I wrote about this, are going to be, it's not going to be them, it's going to be the schools. And I think they are worried about, rightfully so, what happens if you bring in a private equity firm to have an investment in your athletic department. Are we going to have an issue where if someone who doesn't have that emotion that you talked about, doesn't have that affinity for college sports, looks at the income statement or whatever they, for that year and sees, okay, football made this and basketball made this, and volleyball is losing this and swimming is losing this, let's cut those. That's what they want to avoid. Are they going to make decisions that, unfortunately, rightly or wrongly, private equity is sometimes known for, which is callous, black and white, just looking at the numbers only and not considering necessarily the qualitative side of things? That's what they're worried about. But there is a world, and I think this has been a question too. Will private equity be able to invest without taking an active controlling role or decision-making role within the athletic department? And to me, the answer, from what I hear, yes. It's happening in sports right now. So there is a connotation in the real world and everything else that private equity comes in, they're not going to invest without a say. But in pro sports, in the National Football League right now, there are private equity firms that have put their money into teams without any say in how those teams are run on a day-to-day basis. They've agreed to that. So there is that is the path for collegiate sports and athletic departments that are worried. Now, the last thing I'll say on that, and I know I've been very long-winded probably in this answer, but I've got a lot to say. No. And the last thing I'll say on that is that not every school will have that leverage. There are some smaller schools who need the money to maybe pay their players and grow and fund the development around their stadium, like you talked about, who can't afford to say, give us money and you stay out of decision making and all that. They're going to have to be like, okay, fine, we'll let you have some say. That's a possibility as well. It's not like the NFL, who had all the leverage. So, those are, I think, some things that I don't know which way this is going to go and when, but those are all things that are being talked about and considered right this very second.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think you brought up a good point, because
thank you.
I'm not I didn't study the legalities behind like, the whole settlement. I just, read a paragraph, read the topic, and I didn't read like the whole, I don't know, 400 and 500 page document. Do you ever think, I guess from a technical standpoint, you mentioned earlier, like just the example of, football's the most profitable, draws in the most revenue out of all the college sports.
Those two different things, by the way. Not necessarily profitable in some schools, but
exactly.
Revenue, yes.
Revenue, yeah. My apologies. Draws in the most revenue just because you make a lot of money doesn't mean you're profitable. Good point you made. But I think you mentioned like the example of volleyball not being profitable. Do you ever think we get technical, that private equity firms get like on
and
a technical
standpoint? I don't know that,
standpoint?
by the way. I don't want any volleyball heads coming after me. I'm just, just the person that came to mind. Yeah.
Oh, well, instead of volleyball, we'll say sport A draws in a lot of revenue and sport C doesn't draw in a lot of revenue. Do you ever think we'll get to a point where private equity firms get technical in their agreements with universities where they only invest in specific sports, or do you think legalization may come in where it's you invest across all sports?
Well, for that to happen, they'd have to roll just the football program into an LLC, and I don't even know how that would work. Like I'm not a lawyer. I can't see that happening.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. So because I know like one of the biggest things for like the revenue sharing model is, gender wage gap is like a huge topic in sports, and I think one of the laws is like you have to pay female athletes like a percentage or like almost a fair split. So we'll see how the laws come into place with that. Yeah. So we'll see. I mean, Kentucky, Duke, it was surprising when I saw your article with them with the championship blue. So we'll see where it goes with that. If you had like had to make a prediction of like, I don't know, another school or like another program to, kind of, go into this kind of like model of LLC, what would you predict?
I can't predict because privacy, I guess, or confidentiality reasons, I cannot. But what I can say is I think it's coming, and I think it'll be a domino. It'll be like dominoes. Yeah. It's simple math. There's growing costs. Where is the extra revenue going to come from? Where's the extra, not even revenue, it's not revenue, it's cash infusion. Where is the cash coming from to pay for these extra costs? And how can they fund these stadium developments? How can they keep up with their neighbor who's growing their program?
Yeah.
The money has to come from somewhere. So it is, and the money is there. So I think there will be guardrails and there will be all sorts of things that happen, but it is coming. It is simple math.
Yeah. We'll just see how it comes together. Obviously this upcoming season is like the first year. NIL's always been around, but like this upcoming year is the first year we see, with the revenue sharing model being intact and players getting paid. So we'll see how it all comes together. That's all I have, Jesse. Pretty much answered everything. I don't know if you want to share any other like insights with the audience, what I may have not, discussed, or like anything you want to share.
I think we're in the infancy. I guess I want to share that I appreciate you inviting me on. I like what you're building with the channel. I think it's a very cool thing, very entrepreneurial of you. So I'd be happy to come back in the future if another topic pops up that is in the sports, risk, financial services, private equity, etc. world.
For sure.
I'd be happy to come back. So thanks for having me.
That concludes this video. I hope you all enjoyed. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're new, be sure to drop a like and subscribe. And if you're watching this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, be sure to follow the podcast channel. And until next time, I will see you all next week for our next video.